because America is that much more privatized, there are that many more companies you have to deal with. With England, I don't know what it's like now, but it just used to be the gas board. And they would sort of throw down a load of pipes and say they'll be back the next day. And of course, you wouldn't see them for 3 weeks, which is an understandable ritual. it
very
changed.
English, very English. Yes, of course, we'll see you tomorrow. That's it, gone.
And unfortunately, there isn't the, well, we could be back tomorrow. We could do it, off the books, if you liked, which you often got, at least with gas people, so at least if you paid a little bit extra, you could get your water back on, or whatever it was that wasn't working. But here it doesn't seem to work that way, and they're not, I mean, they're not bad. They're all the various blokes we've dealt with are very good, but the companies themselves are, as usual, full of red tape and stuff. So we couldn't switch on the gas without a proper gas inspector switching on the gas, which took one little turn of a knob, and that was it. But he had to be there. It's a bit like, I mean, you'd think they were unionized, which I don't think they are, given the amount of jobs worths there are within. I remember when we were with Hawkwind, we were doing the final program, the music to the final program, which never actually came out they all hated it except me and Hawkwind, and they had to have a union guy to turn on the amp. We couldn't, plug in the amp. We couldn't actually plug in our own amps. They had to have a union bloke coming by and stopping and watching you while you plugged in the amp. And sometimes the union guy wasn't around, so you just had to hang around for an hour. Everybody ready to go, but getting less and less enthusiastic until the union guy turned up and said, "Right, there you go," and then off we went. and I'm not anti-union for a second, but sometimes, I mean, I know how Thatcher got in, because by the time she got in, everybody was sick of too much protectionism going on. And I wish to God, the unions had a bit more sense and done a bit better negotiating, because they cut their own throats in the end.
And of course now it swung back in completely the other direction in the UK. So now after years and years of deregulation and removal of red tape, of course what happens is all the safety protocols go. So that's when you get utter human tragedy occurring.
Absolutely.
And that's the whirlwind that we have reaped, embracing, high level, kind of third, generations of capitalism, late stage capitalism, if you will. We're just living in the chaos of it all now.
I know. And those of us who warned that this would happen, if you like, or grumbled that this would happen, or whatever. I don't want to dignify it too much, but those of us who said, you won't, this will come to a sticky end, it did come to a sticky end, and here we are, enjoying our being rightness while we shiver in the cold.
While the world burns and freezes alternately. It's true. It's one of those things where we're laughing, of course, because the alternative is to be weeping. It's
right,
just,
absolutely.
Yeah. Man,
well, sorry.
Excuse me. No, carry on, Mike. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, the Jerry Cornelius, I think it was the second Jerry Cornelius novel. I was actually sitting on the toilet going through a book of photographs that had just been published by, I think, Felix Green, his name was. He was a photographer who'd been out in Vietnam, and he's the one who took the picture of the burning child running towards you, and various other pictures of that kind, which did turn a lot of people towards being against the war. And I was just crying my eyes out watching this. But half an hour later, I was actually writing a comic scene based on those on the pictures that I'd seen, because there wasn't anything else you could do. Well, at least I could do, but to but turn it into black comedy, I suppose you'd
Yes.
call it.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and so anyway, and that's really what the Cornelius stories are. A lot of them about. They're laughing because otherwise you'd be crying.
Mike, speaking of Jerry Cornelius, what's the when is Wigan going to be published?
Oh well, that's a story. I sold Wigan to PS Publishing, Pete Crowther's publishing outfit,
Yeah.
For New Worlds, and that was, I don't know, almost a year. No, yeah, about 9 months ago. And meanwhile, Pam Zelene, who wrote Heath Dares with the Universe and writes very, very rarely, had written a tribute story to Terry Bisson, who's the guy who recently died and had done Bears Discover Fire, which won a Hugo, I think, or a Nebula, or both. I mean, it was a good story. And so she did a story in tribute to Terry, not knowing at the time that he was dying, called Bears Discover AI, which is a very good story, and again a kind of mock comic story, I suppose. I don't know what you call it, but and in the meantime Terry died, and we both of us realized, but we thought, it's getting on a bit since we sold these stories. So I wrote to Pete, and he hasn't been particularly well, so I don't want to sort of go too hard on him. And I said, when are they coming out? And he said, and eventually there's a bloke called Nick Gevers, I think he pronounced his name. I don't know how to pronounce his second name, but he's the other editor. And he said, well, we should have all the stories in by the end of the year, and we should be publishing it next year. And we'll all be fried or frozen by then. I mean, and both these stories had contemporary themes. The Wigan is about, I suppose it's about, a part of it's about global warming and all that stuff, and it's done as a comedy. And so eventually I said to Pete and Nick, I said, how about if I bring out a special issue of New Worlds, a limited edition of New Worlds, essentially, because it's the 60th anniversary of my taking over the magazine, and it's the 100th anniversary of the Surrealist Manifesto, and combine the two and bring out an issue to celebrate that. And they said they didn't mind, that we could do that. So essentially, if you got more money in your pocket than sense in your head, you can buy the Wigan, probably for the price of Wigan, actually. I shouldn't. Earlier, we're planning it to come out in May of June of this year.
Oh, wonderful.
So it'll have me, Pam, Charles Platt has done a show. I've tried to get the people who are left alive, and there aren't that many of them, to contribute something, and I'm still trying to get a friend of mine to do a translation of a piece of Boris Vian for the surrealist end of it, and Richard Glyn Jones is doing the design. He's done some wonderful stuff he's really got good. I mean, he was good to start with, but now he's really good. And he was one of the old art editors, and so we've got most of the people who are still around, and we're also doing something that hasn't been done as far as I know, which is a photo feature on Ballard's Crash Cars exhibition, because
wow.
Pam and John Lifton, her husband, put that on. They were the ones who actually did the real work on it, like getting the space and getting all the various arts institutes, together to do it. And they took pictures, and they'd never shown those pictures. They never, nobody's ever asked for them. And so Pam said, "What about us doing that? That'll be the Ballard end of it, because But I haven't yet got anything from Tom Dish or John Sladek, and I'm not quite sure whether I'll be able to or not. But those are the dead authors, but the living authors are all on board, I think. It's just a shame that Lang Jones died. He only died a year ago, and I would have loved to have had him. But I might do a reprint, just a short reprint. He did a really funny story about, it was called something like The Short Life of Ludwig van Beethoven III, and it's about Beethoven's grandson who wanted to be an accountant, but his father insisted that he become a composer, and he hated composing. And Lang also wrote a bit of music, because Lang was primarily a musician. He wrote a bit of music that was cod Beethoven to go with it as well. So if you read music, you'll get extra pleasure from the story. So I think I might redo that one, because it was done as sleeve notes for a non-existent record. So that should be fun. And I'm looking forward to it. It's a bit of extra work, and Linda is cursing me because it's also a bit of extra money, because I'm obviously going to have to pay for it. But then I'm used to paying for New World. So,
right, of course.
Yeah. So I'll just sit down and write a Hawkmoon novel, and then we'll be ready to go.
Right on. That is quite a nice segue into what I wanted to talk to you about, which actually, before I do that, I'll do the intro, which is welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Andrew Sumner, and this is the great Michael Moorcock, and that is the latest we've ever got into an episode before I've actually introduced it.
Absolutely, right.
Brilliantly, I love it.
And I'm not in the grate anymore. I'm on an actual table. She's taken me out of the grate, down from the chimney, and here I am.
And it's Mike. As always, it's such a pleasure to see you, and it was lovely to see you in the flesh over the summer, mate. That was that was a lovely day.
Yes, it was a very nice day. Time. And so were the pies, all the way from Wigan.
Thank you. Yeah, the least I could do. And funnily enough, I was in Wigan at the weekend, seeing my dad, and which is where he lives now, and I was enjoying a delicious chunky steak pie from Bowen's, which my sister's dog was extremely envious of and trying to get to, but I remained supreme, and Alfie remained defeated and dejected in his lack of chunky steak with a crust around it. It was very, very nice. Such a treat.
Good.
The trick, of course, is to just only eat one rather than the 3 or 4 I could eat on the bounce with ease.
Well, exactly. I'm still trying to get rid of the weight that I put on the last time we were in France, because I the older I get, the more I think this could be my last time in France, and what am I going to eat?
Of course.
And I just went nuts this last year, to the point where I put on weight that I'm still having a hard time losing, because I don't walk about very much anymore. I mean, I can't. I do my best. With the physiotherapist I was mentioning, and he makes me, well, I don't say he makes me, because I actually don't mind doing it, because it does have a result. But I'm walking around the house, and actually around the outside of the house a couple of times, and walking around the inside of the house and stuff. So actually I should be able to get to the Bakers this year a little bit faster than I did last year, but I don't think I'm going to go to the Bakers quite as much, because I just can't get rid of this weight. And I'm used to being able to, if I have overindulged, sort of just laying off for a week or two and beginning to lose it. But it's old age is
Yeah.
not good for losing weight, unfortunately.
No, that's so true. You know, I'm in that zone where as your body begins to fail you in interesting and unexpected ways, your
Yeah,
mobility, which you take for granted for so long.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, well, I'll walk. I'll do a 40-minute walk to the pub before I have my ale and pie and balance it
Well,
out.
that's a much better idea, actually. I wish I could, but I've got I've got spinal stenosis, so it's
Yeah,
actually constantly deteriorating,
yeah,
and so it becomes increasingly painful to, but you have to try and keep the other muscles going, which is what I'm doing with the physiotherapy guy. So I'm just hoping that I'll have at least legs of steel if the rest of me is
yes,
is still made of putty.
There's almost, that's a bit like that, you know. That was reminding me a bit of, for whatever reason, Man of Steel, Woman of Kleenex. Then, you know, it's like legs of steel, spine of putty, or what have you. You know?
Yeah,
Yeah,
right. Well, it's people. I used to go do a lot of hill walking, as you probably know, in the Dales,
right on.
and I couldn't help it, but I was usually miles ahead of everybody else when I'd just pick up speed, and there was no point in me trying just to sort of slug along with these weaklings. So I'd have to I'd walk and then wait half an hour until they caught up with me, as it were. And now I'm the one that everybody has to wait, looking at their watches and thinking, when's the bugger turning up? And it's a real bitter irony, I can tell you. And it's no fun to be the slowest one of the group.
I've been on both sides of that equation, and a couple of years ago, maybe it was about 10 years ago, it was when I was, maybe longer than that. It was when I was publishing the music magazines and whatnot. There was a bunch of people from the music titles who were doing the 3 peaks. You know, you go up, over 48 hours, right?
I'll tell you privately sometime. I'll tell you about the 3 peaks. I mean, I'll have to do it privately. I can't do it.
Oh, well, I tell you what, I will tell you publicly, and then off camera we can talk about it privately. I'll be very interested in that, because here's my 3 peaks story. So basically, everybody I went with, I was in my 50s then, I guess, and everybody I was going with was 15 years younger than me. And a very close friend of mine, Paddy Horton, who was for a long time was managing director of Empire magazine. About a week out, he goes, so, Sumner, what training have you been doing? And I was like, training? I've been climbing up hills since I was a kid, mate. I grew up in the Lake District. I grew up with access to the Lake District.
I know. I mean, I used to run up hills too in my youth.
Exactly.
In the Lake District.
Yeah. What is it? Wow, God, what's that character? Wilson, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, that's right. Living that
oh,
ascetic,
man, Wilson.
the ascetic lifestyle on top of the hills. So I was like, and he goes, when's the last time you went walking? I don't know, it was about 5 years ago. He's like, mate, I think you might have underprepared, given the scope of the challenge and the fact that you spend most of your life getting hammered in the pub and talking about, music and movies and books. I'm not sure you're
the peak of
fitness. No, I'll be absolutely fine, mate. We started on Snowdon, and literally within half an hour, I realised I was in serious trouble, because I could do it okay, but my pace was a third of everybody else. So I had to really work hard to keep up with them. But actually, by the time we got up and down it, I was way off the pace. So there was already a lot of grumbling among these much younger publishing types, and we then went to Ben Nevis. And as I walked at Ben Nevis, I completely fucked my legs beyond all recognition, to the point that, and it was freezing, and they were having to pace themselves to me, and one lad was Scottish and decided to go up in a kilt, classic style, so no underwear on, and his gonads were literally freezing off as we went up and down Ben Nevis at a leaden pace. And on the way down, in disgust, they all just walked ahead of me, leaving my mate Paddy Horton to basically semi-fireman's lift me down while I was receiving a tirade of abuse You know, it's like, you stupid, this is your fucking fault. Yeah, I told you you should have prepared for this. And by the time we got back to the van, I was then, look, I'm terribly sorry, everyone, but I can't go any further. And like, well, no, we're gonna do Scarfell Pike now. It's like, I can't do it. Yeah, I can't walk anymore. And there was a tirades of abuse. You fucked up the entire weekend, blah, blah, blah. Your punishment is this. You will have to drive the van from now on while we all get some sleep. But I've taken 2 more hours to get down the mountain, and I'm 15 years old and I'm wiped out. I'm totally wiped out. So I get in the van and start driving these guys who all like pass out and sleep within 20 minutes. As was I 10 minutes later. I fell asleep at the wheel and crashed the van into a ditch. I almost fucking killed everyone. At which point the weekend was truly over. And apart from my mate Paddy, many of those people did not speak to me for a long time after that. Do you know what I mean? And so that was my 3 peaks. Is in fact the Twin Peaks. I never did the 3 peaks. I never.
Yeah, this is a different 3 peaks. This is the 3 peaks in Yorkshire. It's Ingleton, and I can't remember the name of the. We lived on the side of Ingleton, so I can remember Ingleton, but I can't remember the name of the other 2 peaks.
Well, I tell you what, since it's an off-camera anecdote, I will very much look forward to talking about that when we've done this conversation. Yeah. But I guess we should segue away from the Moorcock Sumner fell walking hour, and get into some comics, because one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, Mike, is the Titan Comics Moorcock library continues sort of at pace. And there's some great stuff coming up this year. A couple of things I wanted to talk to you about. One of which, so there's volume 2 of
Moorcock's I haven't seen volume 1 yet, actually.
Do you know what I feared the minute I said that is what you were going to say? Because my colleagues Ricky and John are forever getting busted in these conversations for not sending you your copies. And of course, when Nick watches this, he'll be going berserk, getting on the phone, going, "Why aren't we sending Mike his copies? You better send him."
Oh, so, well,
I guarantee
it's all right. I mean, I have seen it before, so I'm not. So it's not like, you know.
That's very measured of you, but I will make sure that you absolutely get your.
No, I wouldn't mind. I mean, because I've been looking forward to it quite a bit, you know. And you know, when people start talking about it on Facebook, you can't join in really.
No, of course, because you haven't seen it. I will make sure I will place a call after this to make sure that you get.
Okay, thanks, Andy. So, I didn't mean to do another moan.
To dob them in. No, I'm glad. I'm glad that you did. And so we've got volume 2 of Moorcock's Multiverse,
right?
Which is it's with 3 artists, but primarily the great Walter Simonson, and that'll be out shortly at the beginning of March. Yeah.
Right.
But then following it, and so we talked a bit about Moorcock's Multiverse last time around, and especially since you haven't seen your copies, and since I'm really working on getting Walter to join us on the next episode. I've been working on it for a while, but I think he really will be here the next time we have this conversation. We'll stow Michael Moorcock's Multiverse until that point. There's another Simonson project that we're bringing out, which I'd really be interested in you talking about the genesis of, which is Elric, The Making of a Sorcerer,
right?
Which we are publishing in July this year.
Yeah, I saw that you were, and I'm looking forward to that too. What I had something to say about something else. I mean about that, but I can't remember what it was now. Anyway, it'll probably come back to me when I'm 100. But anyway, that idea was proposed by me to Walter to see if he wanted to do it.
Yeah,
and because I wanted to work with Walter again after the first one. I really enjoyed working with him, and you know, I'd work with him some more if he wasn't so busy all the time. And he's moving at the moment too, so that's taking forever.
Which is why he's not here with us now. Exactly because of that.
Yeah. I thought that probably was it. Anyway, so I put it to. I think that it was the same editor at the time, you know, who'd done Multiverse. I said, you know, what about doing a prequel to Elric of Melniboné, talking about how Elric learnt to become a sorcerer, and and all the things going on that led up to the tensions between people that you get in the first book. And he said, and this is how he pitched it, I think, to his bosses. It was something like Conan meets Harry Potter. And which wasn't really what I was suggesting, and he knew that too. But he thought, the best way of saying, Paul wasn't there anymore, of course, because Paul had just gone, sure, yeah, go ahead. But this guy was fine, but he had to say what the project was. So the project was Conan meets Conan and Harry Potter combined. Conan goes to school. So anyway, and what I wanted to do was I had this idea of the dream couches, which have been mentioned, that's how Elric had learnt so much in so short a space of time, because for every session on the dream couches, which are rather similar to the hyperbolic hyperbaric, although hyperbolic would be a good one.
The hyperbolic chambers.
The hyperbolic chamber. It's tremendous. Anyway,
that would be a great podcast title, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
hyperbolic chambers.
I would actually, live from the hyperbolic chamber. I was doing daily sessions in the hyperbaric chamber, which actually helped me heal. I had an unhealing wound after they cut off my toes, and so I'd actually got the ideas while I was actually in the hyperbaric chamber, which became my only social life. The guys who ran the chamber, who were crazed divers, who knew about diving, so they knew when to bring you up if you were getting silly and starting to get the bends or whatever, and but they were about as crazy as anybody they'd ever brought up out of the ocean themselves. So there was two mad guys who are still friends, although they've long since moved away from Austin, and I was in this chamber, and a lot of people get claustrophobic, but I actually liked it, particularly when they started showing me episodes of The Sopranos, which
wonderful.
I hadn't seen before. So I started to watch The Sopranos, and you get an hour for in the chamber that just about lasts the same length of time as an episode of the TV, the TV series. So I was actually looking forward to this, and it became my entire life, just talking to these blokes who were also science fiction fantasy fans, so they sort of knew all the stuff that I knew as well, so that was good. They were nuts as I was, and they were so I was talking to them and watching something good on TV, and so this would happen every day. I'd have to, and it was completely wrecking any writing schedule that I had for a while, and I decided to make use of it in the end. So essentially, the dream couches are me in the hyperbolic chamber.
How long were you in every day for, Mike?
What?
How long would you be in for?
Oh, just an hour. You can't go any longer than that, or you actually start to get crazy somewhere. It's just, I don't know quite what it is. I didn't really care. I was in it and I was out of it, and it did its job. That and Linda doing wound care. They were going to cut my leg off. I mean, they were all for cutting my leg off, and Linda basically says, "Not having my lad's leg." And and just fought. She just wouldn't. She says, "You're not doing it. You're just not doing it." And this poor doctor had suggested it, was saying, "Oh, all right, well, we'll try this, but I can't say it'll work. It's never worked before." But between them, they did actually save saber leg, which had been created, I must say, by a doctor buggering up some stitching while I was having a simple operation on a hernia.
Right.
He actually he stitched the aorta, so it meant that I had no blood flow to that leg, and therefore it got gangrenous very quickly.
Jesus Christ!
Yeah, so it was, you know, this is partly what I used to say, don't blame it on the NHS, because these things happen in a paying system as well as, well, you know what I mean. The NHS is a paying system, but anyway, the NHS is not the problem. It's the lack of money, basically, that's the problem, because that's what they've got a lot of flowing through the system. Or the politicians couldn't take their vast amounts of rake off from people. But anyway, that was the origin of the idea, anyway. And so I basically put this to Walter. I said, "Yeah, do you want to do this?" You know, he said, "Yeah, fine." Walter would say, "Yeah, fine," to almost anything, I think. Well, you know, to people he knew, because he's such a nice guy. But which means he's always late as well, because he's always said yes to somebody, and he's then trying to catch up with everything else. But when you get it, it's always of a standard, you know, that you don't get a bad Simonson. At least I've never seen one. You know, and this one, I thought this was, you know, it didn't have quite the majesty, I suppose, of the ending of Multiverse, and with that incredibly complex double page spread at the end, which was just brilliant. He offered me, he doesn't do this, he does this very rarely, if at all. He said, "Would you and Linda like a page from the Multiverse?" He said, because you know, Wheezy thinks that it's the best thing I've ever done, and you know, you think it's the best thing I've ever done, and everybody thinks it's the best thing, and it probably is the best thing I've ever done. So, you know, would you like it? And of course I was tempted to say, yeah, I'd love that double page spread, but I couldn't. It just wasn't fair, you know. It's like saying to a bloke who offers you, you know, a shilling, saying, no, I'll have the pound. And oh, sorry, a 5-penny piece. My age. Anyway, so I asked for a modest picture in the end of that, and Linda had one too, and very nice they are. It's got trams in it, because, you know, he did some good research on those trams, so I like trams. So at the time I was completely tram crazed, and so anyway, so he said, yeah, sure, you know, he'd like to do it, and that's what we did. I mean, I basically thought, let's try for a different cultural background. People tend to do, in sword and sorcery, it's almost always a medieval or quasi-medieval, you know, thatched houses and mighty castles and all that sort of stuff. But at the time, I was also thinking in terms of Elric's origin being maybe American, Indian, as it were, as the kind of early civilization that we talk about, and I'd rather use those than another bloody castle and thatched house and a peasant, you know, peasant to be cut down, filthy peasant. So that's what we did, and Walter, both of us did some research on the backgrounds, and if you look at it, it's not, he hasn't done it slavishly, you know, like, but it's what's it called, Amero-Indian. I can't remember what the real word is, but anyway, it looks back to Indian cultures, Aztecs and so on, as well as North American, and that's how we came to do it, and the rest of it was just basically, you know, how Yurkun gradually becomes his enemy, you know, because he feels he's feeble, and Simoral's trying to save him and so on. I rather wish, in a way, that the French comic, which I like, I mean, which was brilliant, had looked at that first, in order to realize that the importance, because the one thing I didn't like about the French comic was the way Simorel was used, and they have a much more active character, because, you know, these are days of when women are, which is something we've all known, you know, those of us who've been married, that women are in fact the strongest sex, and, you know, and all the rest of it. Yeah. But nonetheless, the fiction doesn't seem to go with that. So I could, you know, I was with them on their point, which was to have a more active role for Simorel in their series, but it lost a bit on the tragedy of him killing her, because she's, you know, it's not so tragic to kill somebody who's trying to kill you, as it were. Yeah. So anyway, we did that, and I've since written another story, a short story that's come out in a magazine that's title I can't remember. It's New Edge Sword and Sorcery. I don't know if you've heard of that,
but it was. Heard of it.
Yeah, it was. They did it on a Facebook project. You know, they raised the money on one of those projects, and they actually did a very good job of it. It's a nice magazine. They did a hardcover special, you know, for people who paid in earlier and all the rest of it, and that's called The Folk of the Forest, which is Elric from just after the time that's in The Making of a Sorcerer. So it sort of all flows together. By God, I wish you luck in putting it all together. I mean, they're always asking on, you know, on Facebook, what order should I read these in? And since I keep writing new ones, we have to change it. You know, say, well, you better read this one first or that one first. But anyway, it might be my last Elric story. But and I'd already said that the novel was going to be.
Yeah. I have heard you say this before.
Yes, I have
than
said
one
it
occasion.
Before. It's right. It's like Tony Bennett, you know, as it were, constantly retiring.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, exactly. James Brown.
I was thinking
stage.
I was thinking about that. You know, they're all saying at the time, and I was saying it too. Look at Tony Barrett. Still got a good voice. And, you know, well, he was more a stylist than a voice, as it were. True. But you know, still got his stuff. And he's 80 years old. I'm thinking I'm 84. I'm just about. I think this coming Saturday, about to do a whole set of vocals for the last of the End of Time records that are coming out.
Oh, wonderful.
Well, I'm thinking, but you know, I can still sing. You know, occasionally, if I've got a bit of a cold or something, there'll be a slight crack I can detect. But normally, I can correct that pretty fast. So I was thinking, you know, just because you're 80 or 85 or whatever you are, you know, it doesn't mean, you know, you can't still sing. You can still sing. Of course, it helps if you've got the right lubrication, like a nice glass of lemonade or something.
Oh yeah, sure.
But it's still, you know, it's not that hard to sing. I suppose if you've been doing it every day of the night of the week, you know, since you were 12, it might be a bit different, but I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, a lot of people still seem to be able to sing quite well in their old age.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, when you look back on somebody like, I was always amazed that Sinatra kept his voice for as long as he did. I mean, ultimately, he didn't really have his voice here, but he always had his style. But given how much he smoked, I was amazed that somebody with instruments as beautiful as his would actually smoke that way. Same with Dean Martin, same with Sammy Davis Jr. Just casually smoking with being blessed with these incredible gifts. It's quite amazing.
It is amazing. I agree. I think it is partly, and it's something somebody said last recording thing I did last year, which I'm not sure is out yet, or is it? Anyway, I did it last year here at home. bloke came round with his stuff, and I did some recording, and he said, if you don't mind me saying so, that's, that sounds your voice on that sounds a bit like David Bowie. And I said to him, it's not surprising. I said, because Bowie was a stylist. As much as he had a decent voice, it was still, he could still style it very well and get a nice range. He had he had a lot of octaves there, and I said, and that's basically what I've always done. I mean, it's more been Johnny Cash was another one who said that. He said, I'm not a singer, I'm a stylist, Yeah. And if you already develop that style, it makes it a lot easier to keep going. I mean, is it Joan? Yeah, I think it's Joan Baez just completely ruined her voice with because she really could only sing in a sort of a very well. I'm not knocking her, but in a very limited way. And as she started doing other stuff, it just went. I mean, it was just sad to hear that voice turn into a croak.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point, because there are there's a particular singer I can think of who had a very unique style, and her vocal range wasn't that wide, but she remained within her style all her life, and that was the pianist and singer Blossom Dearie. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And Blossom Dearie, I saw Blossom Dearie's last gig, as it turned out to be, in Hell's Kitchen in New York with my dad and my brother in 2006. And we felt very lucky to be there. It was at Danny's Skylight Room. But she was, I guess she at that point, she's the age you are now, Mike. But her voice was just completely intact. But she'd always operated within that voice.
Absolutely, I agree. I saw her in an Austin City Limits, I think it was. It was here anyway. And you're quite right. Absolutely, she hardly sounded any different at all, from beginning to end. Which, I mean, and it's a good career. I'd get a bit bored doing that myself, to be fair. But that's just because I get impatient and want to try something different all the time.
Of course. But that's one of the things that's fueled your career being as unique as it is, and covering as many stools as you have. I mean, that experimentation. I mean, I was trying to explain your career to one of my younger relatives the other day, and she said, you clearly are always having a great time talking with that friend of yours, Mike. And I said, well, actually, that friend of mine, Mike, is a really successful author, and I said, so he writes, he writes, but he's a musician as well. He does this, and he does this, and he does this. And she was like, wow, this my niece was saying, he kind of sounds like a comic book character. He's the kind of the person that you get, it's who am I trying to think of? Remember the Our Man Flint in Flint movies?
Oh yeah.
Where he's a spy, he's a brain surgeon, he's a dancer. He's the lover of many women at the same time. It's all of that. And your career is unique to you, isn't it, mate?
I suppose it is. Yes, I try to think sometimes when people are talking about, to try to think who else might have had that sort of spectrum. And there were quite a few. I was thinking Jack Vance. Jack Vance played the banjo and really liked Americana music. And it was always good to hear Jack. When he started plucking his banjo, which he would bring to conventions. So he was very popular at conventions when conversation lagged in particular. And there are quite a lot of people I know there were a lot of the what was it called? I mean, it was the Liverpool band. It was called something like the Dixieland Scousers on West.
That should be the name for sure.
Well, there was a bunch of them in the 50s, half of whom were science fiction fans, and one or two of whom were actually SF writers, and they played Dixieland, and then there were there was the whole folk thing. So there were quite a lot of people who were into folk music as well as writing, but there weren't many people who had a sort of a rock and roll career, if you like. I mean, there weren't many. There are very few rock and roll people who write.
So few. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't really think of any. When I was a kid, I had a choice of, I was either going to be an actor, because I was very good on the end of the term school plays. I mean, I wasn't, and I used to do terrible things to the other kids. I mean, because I would make up lines, and they would look for their cues in the middle of Macbeth or something. I'm making up a line, or I found I could get a lot of laughs, of extra laughs, when I was Bottom in Midsummer Night's Dream. So I was
of a part, yeah, get it.
Absolutely, but of course, the audience is all enjoying it, but the poor buggers on stage are waiting for their cues. Yeah. So I mean, I look back and I don't feel completely guilt-free in that. But that's one of the things I wanted to be. But I wasn't that serious about it, but I thought, I could always do that. And then I was doing music, because of the skiffle thing had started, and everybody had a wash tub, wash tub appliances of various kinds they could turn into instruments.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like punk in a way, where, it was simple instruments that were cheap, that you could that anybody could use, and so I started doing that. When I was 15, I started doing fanzines when I was 15. So I was doing editing at that time too, and my mother very sensibly, when I failed the 11 plus. Because my handwriting was as bad then as it is now, which it means that people are still coming up to Linda, usually at a convention or a signing, saying, "Mike signed this for me 22 years ago. Could you tell me what it actually says?" Because, I mean, there's a lot of that. But so my mother sent me to Pitman's to learn shorthand and typing, because the fundamentals of a journalist in those days, and it was in a sense the fallback job of somebody who wanted to write fiction. So she sent me there, which was probably the best thing she could have done for. She was a great woman, my mother. I was just writing about her in the last Whitefriars novel, which I'm writing at the moment, and I said it's a bit like. You may be just a tad too young for this, but Silvano Manga, I think her name is, an Italian actress. She was always in a factory situation, where other women were. It's a bit like a Carmen sort of situation, where she's got a big sledgehammer and she's banging away at some bit of steel, and all the other women are saying, "Hey, I did a jolly device to and she's going, "Wow, I don't give a damn about you. I've got these tits." But it wasn't my mother. But my mother started when my father left. My mother immediately went out and got a manual job in a factory, and she worked her way up out of that job until she became a director of that factory, without the big tits either. I mean, I have to say, and. But with a very good brain. And she was a pretty woman. But anyway, that wasn't the reason. And I was just writing about that, where her first job was actually having to, with this big claw hammer, take nails out of old wood, because it was just after the war, and we were recycling all the wood that we had. I don't know what to make. Oh, I know what we made. Taylor Walker beer crates. Anyway, that's what she was doing. and I can still smell the varnish of it was an orange varnish they put on the crates over a stencil, which had Taylor Walker on it, and they go this stuff, and it turned to kind of strands of, I mean, it looked like a cover of Weird Tales. It all these weird strands of plastic running down in the shed where they did this stuff. Anyway, that was my mother, who can read about more in the forthcoming blah blah blah. But which I'm sure we'll cover at some time.
Yeah, which volume is that? Is the one?
It's the last volume, the third volume. It's the one I'm writing at the moment.
And what's the title again, Mike, of the last one?
It's the Wounds of Albion.
Wounds of Albion. Brilliant.
Yeah, Wounds.
Wounds.
Yeah, like a wound.
Yeah.
And that'll. I don't know when it's coming out because I haven't finished writing it yet, but I'm well into it. It's just been these last couple of weeks have been, and there's more coming up as well. So I'm trying. I used to get hysterical if I was stopped in the middle of a book, but nowadays I've become more mature and used to being slow, which is all right. After a while, you kind of become you don't mind so much. But anyway, so there was that. There was my mother's sort of getting behind what I wanted to do. And I know that if my father had stayed there, because I knew my father, I'd visited him from time to time, he had virtually no imagination. And I can see him now saying, "You duff bugger." Well, he wouldn't have said "you duff bugger" because he didn't. He's from Mitcham in Surrey, but he would have said something very similar. And and it would all have been having to fight against another male figure, which happily didn't happen to me. With my mother being behind me and him not being around, he was. I think I may have told you this. He was the one that when he found out that Arthur Clarke was gay, which everybody knew, Arthur had never made a secret of it in the whole time since the 50s when I knew him. He was a very sweet guy and very loyal to the guy he was with in Ceylon for years. I mean, it was tragic. The guy was killed on a motorbike. And but when my dad found out that he was gay with all that Sunday newspaper stuff that came up just around the time of his knighthood, my dad wouldn't watch the program anymore. He just said, "Oh no, I can't watch that anymore." So I'm very, very glad that my mother, who came from a very tolerant family and would never take against anybody because of whatever they were, as it were, what nature had given them, it was probably the best piece of luck I had was him leaving behind the Edgar Rice Burroughs books, which he probably also said, "No, I can't read that," because he said that with all of my books. Did I ever tell you this? He used to sit. I'd give him my books when they came out, and sometimes he'd even buy one. I mean, and he'd have his table here with all the books sort of stacked up like that, and then I'd go and see him, and we'd be chatting. I wouldn't ask him about the books because there was no point really. The only ones he ever liked were I think Cain of Old Mars, which was the sort of simplest books I'd ever written, but nonetheless. And he'd say, "Well, I got this far in that one," and he'd have pieces of paper in every one of the books as to where he got up to. So he said, "I got up to page 15 on that one, and maybe page 30 on that one," and they all had those slips of paper in them to show how far he got up to. And he wasn't an unkind man, but he just had no sense of other people's feelings, really.
Yeah.
He just said what was in his head. I didn't mind. I mean, all I was grateful that I hadn't had to put up with it, from after the age of 5. But there it was anyway. And I'd always thought that he'd liked, it must have been that he liked Edgar Rice Burroughs. That's why I had the books. But I think it was just an accident now that he left behind a couple of Burroughs books when he scarpered.
How interesting that would be the case. Edgar Rice Burroughs, and who we've talked about quite a bit on these shows and on our podcast as well. I it's just access something I've always meant to ask you about, and I don't think I have. What did you think of Philip José Farmer?
Well, it's a bit odd. Phil thought that I didn't like his work and told people that I didn't like his work. And I did like his work. I didn't like all of his work. And I actually didn't, I think because the Riverboat series was sort of close in some ways to what I was trying to do, that I didn't like those because I didn't feel they went deep enough or were complex enough. I mean, that was all it was. It wasn't that I felt they were bad books or anything. I just didn't particularly like them. But I read his early books before those started coming out, and I liked them all. I mean, I think one was called The Green Odyssey, which is a very early book I read, science fiction book I read. But I didn't much like his, as it were, I don't know what you call them. There is a word for it. I know John Clute's probably made it up already, and I just don't know it yet. But it's where you take existing characters and write your own structure around them.
Right. Okay.
Which
like
Phil did a lot of.
His pulp pastiche stuff, and his
yes, and I didn't really like the Tarzan stuff he did or any of those. But I did like his other writing, and in fact, I published a story of his in New Worlds, and as far as I know, he still thought I didn't like his work. I don't know. It was a good one. I mean, it was Edgar Rice Burroughs as if written by William Burroughs, which is I thought a very nice little idea. Yeah,
I like that too. Yeah,
I'm actually writing about that now because of I'm doing an introduction. I hope. I hope I can pull it off. An introduction to Jack Vance book, and it's and in it I'm saying the four writers that I can think of that most influenced me in my sort of early career. One of them was Jack Vance. I thought it was Jack Vance, but I've looked it up now, and it wasn't Jack Vance. I thought he'd written the Dragon Masters before I wrote the Elric stories, but he didn't. He wrote them. They first appeared in Galaxy, I think, in 1963, and Elric appeared in Science Fantasy in 61. So I must have thought I was pinching from Jack Vance, but I wasn't. He certainly wasn't pinching from me because the Dragon Masters had, it was nothing like the Elric stories. But I did like The Dying Earth. So The Dying Earth by Vance, Broken Sword by Anderson, just written it down and I've forgotten the name. Anyway, Leigh Brackett, and Edgar Rice Burroughs. There's a sort of a chain of writers from Edgar Rice Burroughs through to, if you like, the present age, but and they all, as it were, began with being influenced to a fairly large degree by Burroughs, but then putting a more sophisticated spin on Burroughs. Leigh Brackett was like that, and also the Mars and Venus, up until the time we knew what Mars and Venus really looked like, were very much borrowed from Burroughs's idea of what Mars and Venus were likely to be like. So I've actually got to change my angle of approach on the Vance because I thought that was one of them. But the Dying Earth was certainly a strong influence on me, as was The Broken Sword by Anderson. And the odd thing is that all of these writers, which I haven't made much of because it means something different these days, they were conservatives. They were Republicans. Every one of them voted Republican, and it was a totally different kind of republicanism then. Of course.
Yeah, it really was.
Yeah, and now I wrote some time ago now an introduction to Vance in which I mentioned that he was a Republican. Nothing wrong with him being a Republican in those days. I mean, it's his point of view. Just I didn't share it, but that wasn't, it didn't make me an arch enemy. And Leigh Brackett, who is a dear friend, I mean, she and Ed Hamilton really became great friends, and they were Teddy Roosevelt Republicans. They believed, just in people making their own way and doing it, which is all right, except it falls down when you don't give anybody a chance. But again, they were people who believed in giving people a chance, giving them a break, giving them a leg up, and then letting them get on with it. Which, in a sense, I've always been as an editor. I remember I helped one author who shall remain nameless, but I've mentioned it before anyway. I helped this author write his first novel. I showed him how to structure and what was, how best to write a novel, just in terms of the structure, not in terms of the material he was using or anything like that. And I did it, and that was it. And he came back to me with his second novel. He said, can you help? I said, no, I can't help you with the second. I said, I'll help. And this was my policy with New Worlds. I'll help any new writer with the first one, but I'm not going to help you with the second one because you've learned enough by now to know what basics you've got to do. So I suppose I'm a Republican after all, and I play the banjo, so maybe I'm Jack Vance.
Well, I think on that Jack Vance banjo playing Republican note, I think that's probably a good point for us to exit on yet another multi-leveled conversation. Well, by the way, Wounds appeared quite a lot in this particular edition,
Yes.
And but I think surely the highlight for me, outside of the conversation about Titan's magnificent Moorcock Universe Elric editions, has got to be the Hyperbolic Chamber, which is going to live on for me well beyond this conversation.
Yes, I think we're in at the birth, Andy. You and me. We're like the two people who discovered the whatever it was, gene or
absolutely,
anyway.
Crick and Watson. Yeah, that's it. Moorcock and Sumner.
Right, yeah,
they discovered the Hyperbolic Chamber.
Right, we did. I think Lily the Pink might have had some. We'll drink. It doesn't quite go, does it? We'll drink to Sumner and Moorcock because they invented the. No, I don't go at all.
The Hyperbolic Chamber.
We'll have to work out a new tune as well.
Absolutely right, and commission the scaffold to score it. I'll be all over that.
Yeah, I noticed that. That bloke who was part of the scaffold, one of the poets.
John Gorman or Roger McGough.
Roger McGough, yeah. He's still working, and he was doing something quite recently, and I can't remember what it was now.
Yeah,
I thought, I'm glad to see you're in work.
I think if I remember correctly, unless I missed it, I think they're all. Mike McCartney, Mike McGee is definitely still around. I think, but I think John Gorman's still around as well.
Well, good for them. I mean, I knew quite a lot of those folks, and in fact published one or two of their poems in New Worlds. They were a very nice bunch of blokes, and I also thought that Pete Brown was from Liverpool, and he wasn't. He was from London. Wow. Because he did a lot of stuff with I think with Liverpool people.
Yeah.
So I automatically assumed that Pete Brown's Battered Ornaments, which was his jazz band, a modern jazz band, which Mal Dean was in.
Such a great name.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And Mal Dean was in it as he played trumpet. So I assume Mal Dean was from Liverpool. Well, from the Wirral. I mean, he was. So I just assumed that everybody in that band were from Liverpool, but they weren't, which is something of a disappointment, I suppose. I don't know.
No, it is. It's always heartening when people come from Liverpool or the environment of Liverpool.
Well,
all the best people
don't think Liverpool has to speak up for itself much anymore. I mean, there was a time when
no longer.
In fact, it was a time when it's the Liverpool I knew. I don't know the modern Liverpool at all. I remember when this was years ago. We were doing a gig at the stadium, I think it's called. It's an old boxing arena.
My dad used to take me there when I was a kid to see the boxing. Liverpool's. It's not there
Yeah.
anymore. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Well, this is Hawkwind, and we were doing this gig at that at that place, and so I didn't know where it was. So I phoned Maldine, and I said, how do I get to the boxing stadium? He said, well, you do this, you do that, and you'll go there. But of course, half the stuff had been torn down before, since Mal had been last in Liverpool. So I'm looking for all these places, and people are saying, not anymore, lad. No, you won't find. And all I saw was this sort of. It looked like a war zone. It flattened.
Right on.
It really did.
It
was just astonishing.
Yeah.
So all the Liverpool that I used to go up to Liverpool quite a lot, because there was a very active science fiction and music bunch with Bill Harry, and Bill Harry was a good friend of mine, and it was Bill Harry who took me to see the Beatles about getting some money when they were handing out money everywhere. And I think I told you this. I must have told you this. It's an old story of mine anyway. The carpet, the Apple carpet, they'd only been going about a week, was worn by hundreds of feet of people going up to try and get money out of the Beatles. And when I got to Derek's office, they had a sort of a kind of a general room where the kind of the people who hadn't quite yet made it to the next room were waiting to state their case why they should get money from the Beatles, and some of the things were ridiculous, and the Beatles gave them the money too, which was worse, I think. And then there was Derek's office, and I got there. By the time I got there, I said to Derek, Bill was with me, and George Harrison was there, and I said, I don't want any money from you. I said, I just give us some advertising space, fair and square. We'll run that if you wouldn't mind. That's what we'll do, and pay us for the advertising space. But I don't want any money. I said, I really don't, because I've seen all these blackmails. And George Harrison, actually, with tears in his eyes, shook my hand and he said, thank you. He said, thank you so much. I mean, this is really what happened. He was, because George was the one who was kind of a bit worried about the money,
Yeah, of course.
The others were saying, oh, it's, we got all this money coming in, give it away to everybody, good. And George is thinking, tax.
Of course he was. Of course it was. That is a glorious full circle moment, because, as you may recall, my dad actually worked with NEMS, the Beatles organisation, on the financial side. So you've wrapped this conversation up in a glorious bow. But also, I think, given us the jumping off point for our next conversation, because there's a whole bunch of the stuff you've just touched upon we should explore in greater detail. But that'll wait for next time, Mike. When hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be joined by Walter.
I hope so.
A bit more of your providing his.
Or if Walter can't make it, bring your dad, because I was wondering how he was.
He's extremely well. He's extremely well.
Good.
Thank you for asking. He's in great shape at the moment.
Oh, great. Well, tell him he's helping keep my spirits up.
I will do. And as of a couple of days ago, completely over the moon, because Liverpool just won the cup about 3 days ago. And he was extremely happy about that. And just about everybody in the city. Very, very sad to see Jurgen Klopp leaving, but, leaving on great terms. Everybody loves him. So, the old man.
The battery, this says the battery's running down, so I can't see you any longer. So I suppose that's telling me that.
I think that's absolutely the time for us to say cheerio.
Right.
So Mike, wonderful to see you, mate, as always.
Yeah, great to see you too. Well, I can't see you now, but great to have seen you, Andy. And I'll see you very shortly, I hope.
I will see you very soon indeed.
Yeah. Okay, and I'll try and push Walter to help too.
Brilliant. Well, you take care of yourself, mate, and
I'll
see you sooner rather than later. And thanks again.
Yeah, great.
Wonderful as always, mate.
Right, and thanks again. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Take care, mate. Bye-bye. If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.